This video is sponsored by Adepta. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. A little late this time because we talked about the LVO winning list, an insane list running a ton of guardsmen during the normally scheduled slot for the show. But we had an insane number of events go down in North America this week. With LVO moving to a new weekend this year from its previous position, there were a lot of already pre-scheduled events that were already going down this week, and that included several other major level events worldwide, most of which we're going to be talking about today. Now, we'll throw a shout out to the Michigan GT. That was a large, over 100 player major level event. However, only ran 5 rounds, so it had a ton of undefeated left at the end. I'm going to be discussing that event in a separate live stream that you'll be able to watch just after this video goes live. And if I remember, I'll drop a link to that in the video description or on the screen here right now. But as you can see, as we move to the Metagame Breakdown, this weekend was absolutely chock-a-block with large events, which we'll be covering in this video. We have a couple of new players at the top of the metagame for this week. Tau Empire with 3 wins at the Albany Borealis, Dragonfall Worlds Qualifier, and Bourbon City Brawl. Now, they also did well at Las Vegas Open, so it seems like the next couple months may be the time of the Tau to return to their top spot near the upper echelons of competitive play. Chaos Demons also doing fairly well at the Edmonton Wargaming Open, ROG Beat Northwest event, and Dragon Worlds Qualifier. Important to note, Edmonton Wargaming Open was another event with a large number of players. I think it was 100 players at that one. However, did not go to a single undefeated. However, as we look down to the next entry, 1 player was playing Chaos Demons. Every other undefeated at that event was playing Adepta Sororitas. So we do have 2 undefeated results from Adepta Sororitas this week on top of that. Space Marines doing incredibly well with a wide variety of chapter selections going undefeated. Ultramarines at the OCB Tournier at Hero Fest, as well as Sonomacon, Raven Guard taking on the Gopher Games GT, Space Wolves at the Würfelgotter Royal Rumble, and Blood Angels at Soul Slayer. Chaos Space Marines also took down the large Denver 40k Fight Club. That was a 6-round event. Aeldari taking down the Santiago Open, Leagues of Votann winning the GT against Cancer, Adeptus Mechanicus at the Dumpster Fire GT Fall Edition, Chaos Knights taking down the massive 8-round Sydney Supermajor. It was a relatively smaller event, but did go all 8 rounds, and more impressively, Chaos Knights won all of them, being the only undefeated player at the event after all those games. Those games were streamed over by our friends at Australis Tabletop Wargaming Network. You can go check them out. I'll drop a link in the video description if you want to see coverage from that event. Necrons took down the Battle at the Guild, and as a little bit of a treat, Genestealer Cults also took down the Games Night 2-Day. That's a much smaller event that I typically cover here. It was only 18 players, but did go down to a single undefeated who went 5-0, and with a cool Genestealer Cult list that I'm excited to discuss. So we're going to throw that in here as well. And with that, let's hop into these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Adepta. Adepta's been a huge supporter of the channel for a while, so I'm excited to talk about them and their new updates. For those who don't know, this is a dice probability calculator app that can give you quick and easy access to expected dice results at your fingertips. So if you're wondering about particular unit builds, or you want to know what the best course of action in a particular game state might be, you can use Adepta to very quickly get those results by importing unit profiles and quickly spitting out expected damage. This can help you smooth your army list building or give you insights into the game. And their latest update takes into account a ton of player feedback, improving things like unit profile imports, making it easier to import your datasheets and their weapon stats into the dice calculator, a full modifier and ability section to more easily input all types of attacker and defender special rules, a wider selection of results to grant you a deeper understanding of the results, as well as a new text summary to more easily understand the math you're looking at in English. So follow the links down in the video description to get access to Adepta today. And big thanks to them for sponsoring the video. So starting with our new meta frontrunners, Tau Empire, we're going to head on over to the Bourbon City Brawl and talk about Luke Rolfe and his incredibly interesting Kroot Hunting Pack. We've talked about Kalyans, we've talked about Montcas, but it's been a little while since we've talked about a hunting pack. And this is an interesting variety that is not just focusing on Kroot units, but also putting a little bit of emphasis on ranged attackers and gunships. Now, we're taking 2 Kroot Lone Spears, a War Shaper with root-carved weapons for devastating wounds, as well as a Trail Shaper with Nomadic Hunter, and a Flesh Shaper with Krutok Flock to prevent enemies from deep striking nearby. We are filling the center of the table with a grand total of 60 Kroot Carnivores, 4 units of 10, as well as a single large unit of 20. That unit of 20 is going to be helpful because we do have a reinforcement stratagem in the detachment. Once that unit goes down, you can spend 2 CP and bring it back to life once per game. Now, oftentimes what we see is a maxing of the number of Krutoks the army can bring. And while we do have a ton of Krutoks in this build, we are not focusing entirely on them. Instead, this army is playing 3 units of 2 Krutoks Riders, which are phenomenal objective holders. They have a ton of attacks if you include their guns, plus their melee attacks, a ton of wounds at a high toughness characteristic for only 60 points. Incredibly good utility units. They're very similar to Kroot Rampagers. They're a little bit worse in melee, but they do have that gun. And if you do take them in larger units, you can kind of use them as backup Krutoks Rampager equivalents. However, the army is just taking also a maximum number of Krutoks Rampagers, the full set of 18. From there, we also have a stealth battlesuit team. That's to spot for the 2 Hammerhead gunships. These guys are equipped with rail guns that are sitting in the back line of the army. The big benefit of these guys is that you do have just a ton of forward presence, a lot of scouting units, a lot of forward operators, a lot of units that are going to gum up the middle of the table. That pulls focus from the Hammerhead gunships, forces your opponent to move up their heavy hitters to kill the Krutoks Rampagers that are actually threatening to take the center of the battlefield and push offense into their opponent's deployment zone. And that means the Hammerhead gunships can just sit in the back there, get spotted for by the stealth battlesuits, and just pound away for the entire game. We have a Vespid Stingwing unit for utility, as well as a Kroot Farstalker unit to infiltrate up the center, and a Kroot Hound unit for utility as well. I always like to see these big Kroot hunting packs, and it's cool in this case to see a Kroot hunting pack that isn't all cavalry focused. There is a lot of different smaller units in there on top of that. It's kind of a mix between the infantry and the cavalry varieties. Now with that, we're going to move over to the ROGBNW event. This one was won by Reagan Boss playing Chaos Demons. Now, Chaos Demons, for the most part, a lot of the armies being played in the faction are playing Demonic Incursion right now. The flexibility it gives the army and the enhancements it brings are phenomenally powerful. However, Reagan decided to buck the trend, and for this event, go 5-0 with Plague Legion. Now, this attachment allows you to force additional battle shock checks on enemies in order to make greater use of your Shadow of Chaos effect. Obviously, the Chaos Demon Shadow of Chaos, if you are within it, which is dependent on your objective control, as well as your proximity to greater demons, forces you to take damage when you fail battle shock checks, and Plague Legion's all about maximizing the casualties inflicted by that ability. Now, Nurgle is also benefited by the fact that they have basically the greatest internal synergy of any of the Chaos subfactions, so as a cohesive army, they're much more capable than an army that is constructed out of pure Tzeentch, for example. In this case, we're bringing a Great Unclean One with the Droning Shroud. This essentially turns him into a little mini faction-specific Be'lakor. It makes all of your Nurgle demon units within 6 inches of him untargetable by ranged attacks outside 18 inches. So essentially the exact same thing as Be'lakor's aura, but it works only for Nurgle stuff. We have another Great Unclean One with Maggot Maws. That forces enemies within 6 inches of him to take battle shock chests in your shooting phase, then also provides the chance to suffer mortal wounds. Most of the time, these Great Unclean Ones are trying to toilet bowl the game around themselves, essentially force the opponent to come in and fight them, and so a lot of these effects are built around doing maximum damage but with battle shock checks and forcing additional battle shock checks to stuff that are nearby them. Speaking of which, we also have a Sloppity Bilepiper with Canker Blight. This allows you to replace the D3 mortal wounds normally inflicted by your Demonic Incursion ability with just simply killing a unit in the battle shocked enemy, excluding a monster or a vehicle. So if you have something like a high value unit, like let's say a mounted chariot, for example, independent character, or even just multi-wound heavy infantry, failing a battle shock check within 6 inches of the Sloppity Bilepiper then forces you to immediately kill one of those models. So even if you're an Assault Centurion or something with a bunch of wounds and a high defensive characteristic, the Bilepiper can just kill you by forcing you to fail battle shock checks. The benefit here is that the Sloppity Bilepiper forces battle shock checks at the start of each fight phase. That includes both you and your opponent's fight phase, which allows you to constantly be forcing these checks. If your opponent comes in to engage with this army, it's going to force so many battle shock checks on you that it will start to actually attrition taking you down just with those mortal wounds. There's also a second Sloppity Bile Piper in the army as well, so we have 2 instances of this effect. So in 2 separate areas of the table, you can just be pinging enemies for constant mortal wounds. You force 1 in the command phase, thanks to the detachment ability. You force 1 in the fight phase, thanks to the Bile Piper's aura. You could potentially force 1 in the shooting phase, thanks to the Maggot Maws. Just an enormous number of battle shocks, and most of those are also going to be either dealing damage or forcing you to remove models. We also have Rodigus in here for primary objective control, just to be a big goober. He also gives you +1 damage on your Nurgle stuff, which is huge. We then have a ton of Plague Bearers, 4 units of 10 Plague Bearers. They can hop around the battlefield. They can perform your action secondaries. They're very difficult to kill. Toughness 5 with 2 wounds apiece and an invulnerable save for 11 points per model is very nice, and they will objective secure for you. So you don't necessarily need to have the Great Unclean Ones fighting on objectives. You can have the Plague Bearers do that work, and the Great Unclean Ones can actually pursue kills on your opponent's army. We have a unit of Nurglings for the midboard, as well as 2 Plague Drones. These will give Nurgle units wound rerolls. The one thing we don't have here is a Font of Spores outlet that gives +1 AP to Nurgle demons within 6 inches. And that's very classic inside a Plague Legion. Usually the army is actually built around a ranged platform that's going to be utilizing Font of Spores to buff its range damage output. Things like a Brace of Soul Grinders, for example, is pretty good here. However, in this case, what we're going to be doing is taking a Knight Despoiler with double Despoiler Gatling Cannon. Now, the Despoiler Gatling Cannons are actually great in this specific situation because, well, they don't get the benefits of things like the Plague Drones. What they do get are the Great Unclean Ones' toughness debuffing effect. Great Unclean Ones at the end of your movement phase can choose something within 12 inches and drop its toughness by 1, and that is a cumulative effect. So multiple Great Unclean Ones pointing at a single target with that ability can potentially drop their toughness by multiple numbers. In addition, you can also make it so that you have 1 unit that is going to be targeted by your ranged attacks, dropping a toughness 10 down to a 9, for example, or a toughness 12 down to an 11, which is important for the Chaos Knight. And then you can target another unit that you're about to engage in melee with Rodigus or the Great Unclean Ones. They have a good but not above average strength characteristic, and so cutting enemy toughness characteristics oftentimes gives them +1 to wounded melee, which is a big deal. But then the downside of the Knight Despoiler is that, while it does have a solid AP value, so it's able to shoot through cover fairly well, its strength characteristic is low into high toughness enemies. And in this case, because we can cut toughness 12 down to toughness 11, or even 13 down to 11 if you really need to get there, the Knight Despoiler can wound any target in the game on 5s or better, meaning that the massive number of shots it's going to be putting out is incredibly effective into most things in the game. It doesn't have the typical downside of these styles of Despoiler loadouts. That's a really, really interesting list. We have potentially both ranged and melee damage from the Great Unclean Ones, especially if you can trigger the Plague Drone ability early. We then have this Knight Despoiler putting down enormous amounts of damage from range. None of those Great Unclean Ones can be interacted with from farther than 18 inches away. So the opponent is, if they want to come engage the Great Unclean Ones, not only are they fighting into a tough defensive profile, but they also have to move up close enough that then the Knight Despoiler can shoot them, Plague Drones can activate on them, and then we can throw a bunch of these Nurgle demons at them and absolutely blow them up. Very cool list. A little different than even the Plague Legions we typically see, but obviously Plague Legion is a much different detachment than we often see Chaos Demons played in. Now with that, we're going to move over to the Edmonton Wargaming Open. Again, this was a relatively large event, but only ran 5 rounds, so had 3 undefeateds. Now, one of them was Chaos Demons. We just talked about them. It was a demonic incursion. However, the other 2 lists were almost identical. Something must be in the water up there in Edmonton, because we had 2 Hallowed Martyrs Adepta Sororitas lists at the 2nd and 3rd places. Now, we're going to go to the 2nd place placer here to talk about this list. This is Cass Kylie Burke, who was running, again, Hallowed Martyrs. Now, this is a fairly standard variety of Hallowed Martyrs detachment. We've seen very similar lists in the past. This includes a Canoness with Saintly Example, so she'll generate you Miracle Dice when she dies, a Canoness with Jump Pack with Through Suffering Strength to improve her damage output, Judith Eroita to generate some command points for the army in order to fuel things like your Divine Interventions and your Suffering and Sacrifices, Morvenval, and a Palatine. We have a Battle Sister squad, 2 Immolators to combat squad the Battle Sisters, and probably the unit of Sister Novitiates also in the army. We have 2 Castigators in order to provide some backline shooting, Paragon Warsuits for Morvenval to join into. We have a unit of Celestian Sacrosants, which oftentimes attaches Judith Eroita for -1 to be hit and wounded. They're -1 to be wounded innately as soon as someone joins them, but then they also gain -1 to be hit from Judith, which makes the unit fairly tanky, although oftentimes we also see the Palatine jump in there if she's not hanging out with the Sister Novitiates. We then also, again, have a Sister Novitiate squad, a Zephyrim squad, 2 Seraphim squads for utility, a unit of Paragon Warsuits to join with Morvenval, and a Retributor squad for some late game shooting as well. Overall, fairly standard stuff from Hallowed Martyrs. We've seen very similar lists like this in the past. Now with that, let's move over to Space Marines, and the first one we're going to be talking about today is Ultramarines. Daniel Simone was undefeated with Ultramarines at the OCB Atelier Hero Fest. This was a very interesting Ultramarine list. While we did see some appearances from Stormlands Task Force styles of Ultramarines that we've seen in the past, this one was very different, it being an Iron Storm Spearhead, the vehicle-focused Space Marine detachment that gains you rerolls on all of your individual attack activations. This includes Robute Gilliman and a trio of Tech Marines, one running Adept of the Omnissiah to blank incoming damage on your vehicles, one with Master of Machine War to allow one of your vehicles to either advance or fall back and shoot. We then have a Hellblaster squad, kind of an interesting inclusion here, but they're a fairly good trade for utility units. You can, Oath of Moment, something small, and 5 Hellblasters will most likely kill it if it's only 5 models. Hitting and wounding with rerolls, and likely wounding on 2s with a reroll floating in there, potentially double shooting if they end up overcharging their plasma guns. Then when you shoot back at them, they're going to shoot back again. So you can potentially 2-for-1 your opponent with the Hellblaster squads, because you'll jump out, attack something, kill them, they'll shoot you back, you'll attack another unit and kill it. And you can even get ahead of your opponent by eating their activations, essentially. It takes 1 activation from your opponent's army to kill the Hellblasters. If you then kill a new unit that hasn't activated yet during that shooting phase, it means that suddenly the Hellblasters are basically wildly up in value and have essentially printed money for that turn. We have a bunch of other utility, 2 units of Scouts, as well as a Reaver squad. The Reavers are kind of nice in here. They have Scout, so they can push up the table early, or they can even deep strike, so they're a good rapid ingress threat. And they're incredibly good at taking enemies off objectives. So they reduce enemy OC characteristic nearby them, which means that even against OC2 enemies, they're good enough in melee that they're going to be able to clip through light infantry just fine. And even if a couple survive, with the OC reduction effect, Reavers are probably taking an objective from you. So they're actually very difficult to deal with in that capacity, and they'll prevent Iron Storm Spearhead from suffering one of the big weaknesses, which is the fact that it's a relatively tepid army to play. It's kind of slow. You only have Master of Machine War as a throughout range enhancer, besides using rapid ingress and strategic reserve play. So a lot of times what your opponent can do if they have defensively oriented objectives is just kind of wait you out. They can screen you, they can move and block you. The Reavers give you an out to play against those armies that are just going to be trying to score you without having to engage with your army. Now, what are we actually engaging with? This includes a Brutalis Dreadnought, which is kind of cool. A little bit of a melee punch there. The fact that this guy is twin linked on his melee attacks means he can use his floating reroll from Iron Storm Spearhead on his hit roll. The same goes for his multi-melta. If he's able to move and shoot normally, he's essentially going to get a full reroll multi-melta, because you're going to use your floating reroll on a hit roll, and then he's twin linked on the wound roll, so it's basically just rerolling almost everything unless you roll 2 1s or 2s to hit, which is fairly unlikely. Plus, it gives you a good late game counterpunch. We do have a Redemptor Dreadnought to hold down the middle of the table, and then a bunch of shooting. 2 Gladiator Reapers to kill infantry units. They can also plink wounds into heavier targets because they have devastating wounds and twin linked on their turret weapon. The other thing too is that they can get sustained hits too, targeting infantry. And if you've killed one model out of that infantry unit beforehand, you can then use Mercy as weakness to give them critical 5-ups because they're a vehicle. That will give them sustained hits 1 on their Tempest Bolters, but also their Top Gun will get sustained hits 2 on 5-ups, which is a huge improvement in damage. So even against really, really hefty, tanky infantry picks, these guys are basically doing enough damage to one-shot most infantry things in the game, or at least put crippling damage on them. Even if they're shooting into really strong save characteristics, they're just throwing so many devastating wounds and so many saves at their target that they're most likely going to get a couple through. We then have a Predator Annihilator for some long-range shooting. We do have an Impulsor for the Hellblasters, so that's going to give you a fairly nice sort of aggressive unit. They can push forward, they can shoot out the top of the Impulsor, so you can, for example, give it +1 to hit with the Tech Marines, and then fire the Hellblasters, overcharge their gun, and any damage suffered from overcharging then goes onto the vehicle and doesn't kill any of your models, which is nice. And then last but certainly not least, we have a Repulsor Executioner. Now, cool thing here, we do have Robute Gilliman to give all of the bonuses that he will grant. That's big for Iron Storm Spearhead, which tends to use command points quite a bit, so him getting a free command point every round is a big deal. But the other thing too is that he's going to be standing next to the Tech Marines to get Lone Operative, and as long as the Tech Marines are next to a vehicle, they'll chain the Lone Operative out, essentially, so he'll be able to stand next to vehicles as long as he has a resident Tech Marine and getting that benefit too, so he's very difficult to shoot at. Very cool to see an Iron Storm Spearhead doing well. Very different than we typically see Ultramarines, which is like kind of locked into Gladius Task Force and a lot of other stuff. With that, we're going to move over to the Gopher Games GT, Benjamin Fredrickson went undefeated with a Shadowmark Talon. Now, this is basically the exact same Shadowmark Talon we've seen John Lennon bring to Crucible Major a couple weeks ago. We saw it see some play at the LVO championships as well. It's essentially unchanged. The version of this list is basically the same from event to event. Now, I will say, I think it's likely that Gopher GT used the +1 to wound oath because we did have a Vanguard veteran squad with Inferno pistols. That's some technology we saw from John Lennon. In order to do a little bit of damage on the attack with those guys, they're able to use Hunter's Instincts to rapid ingress in, move up, shoot an oath the moment target and kill it, and then charge something else and do some damage and tie stuff up there. So you have +1 to wound on oath. Those things aren't very high strength, so a lot of times you just play something, just more Storm Shields essentially on your Vanguard veterans, but in this case I imagine that we are. Now, continuing on our journey through the Space Wolf factions, we're going to move over to the Würfelgolter Royal Rumble. This one was won by Mario Tietz, who went undefeated with a Stormlands task force coming out of Space Wolves. A classic variety of Stormlands task force, this time with a little bit more infantry than we would expect. This includes Arjek Rockfist and Bjorn the Fell-Handed, a lieutenant with combi weapon, Logan Grimnar, and a Wolf Priest. The Wolf Priest is going to be attaching into a big unit of Wolfguard Head Takers. These guys have paired Mastercrafted power weapons. He's going to give them a respawn back into the unit every single round. So even if you lose a couple of these guys on the way in, they're still going to be able to basically top themselves off. And it is kind of difficult to chew through 18 wounds at T4 with a 3+ save. I don't want to say they're difficult to kill because they don't have any invuln saves if they're taking the paired weapons, but it is slightly harder than you would expect. They're not exactly tactical marines, like 2 damage shooting isn't going to kill them all, and so they are going to take 1 or 2 activations to kill, and if it takes you long enough, then you may get some reanimation out of that Wolf Priest with his Apothecary effect, but otherwise, he's going to give them +1 to wound, which is a huge deal. We have a Wolfguard Terminator unit, which can likely attach Arjak Rockfist to make use of his defensive leadership ability, so they could take a charge and still fight on death and be pretty effective there. We can use those guys to drop in, we can use those guys to drop in early with Logan Grimnar, or simply use Logan Grimnar to drop himself in early to supplement an aggressive push with his command point tax. We then have a ton of Thunderwolf Cavalry, a total of 15, 2 units of 6, a smaller unit of 3 Wolfguard Head Takers. I don't think we have any attachments for them. They're probably just going to be a little trading unit, which I think is really great. It's kind of underrated as a piece. With 18 2-damage melee attacks, they'll almost certainly kill most other utility units in the game that you can imagine. And for 110 points, you get 3 of them and 3 Hunting Wolves. So you can kind of imagine that they're almost just like an 85 or 90 point unit by themselves. They're going to trade for another unit of equal cost, and then you also still get another utility unit that can go and do an action or something like that. That's essentially free. It basically costs you the equivalent of like 25-ish points. What a steal for these little 3-man units. We have 2 units of Wolfen. Those are regular Wolfen, by the way. They just like claw Wolfen, essentially, that have fight on death. And then 2 units of Storm Shield Wolfen, which gives you a lot of, again, little units that can run around the battlefield. They all get advanced in charge from the detachment ability, and they can trade for enemy scoring units. So this army lacks entirely for shooting outside basically just Logan Grimnar. However, it has so much threat range that what it doesn't want to do is have to throw its Thunderwolf Cavalry into the mix too early. So it has all these little units that can clear out those enemies that are screening, movement blocking the Thunderwolf Cavalry, preventing you from getting to grips with the meat of their army. You can trade Wolfen for those units just fine. You don't really feel bad about that, and then use that to sort of springboard your Thunderwolf Cavalry charges on the subsequent turn. And if your opponent has a ton of units that is going to be effective at scoring and trying to beat you out on score, even if you're trying to jail them or get stuck in with them with the Thunderwolf Cavalry, you can again throw these units all over the table and just constantly be threading all your opponent's utilities. So I imagine that the Thunderwolf Cavalry actually play kind of cagey in the early game, and all they want to do is force your opponent to try to play around their threat ranges and either throw their utility forward that you're then going to kill with your Wolfen and your Wolfguard Head Takers, or try to movement block the Thunderwolf Cavalry. Again, you're going to kill it with your light units, and that's going to open up the way for the Thunderwolf Cavalry in the future. You attrition your opponent down and then sort of drive for their heart with a hugely long threat range unit of cavalry that can just engage everything they have and kill them on their home objective. We're going to move over to a slightly smaller event to round out the Space Marine faction. This was the Soul Slayer event and was won by Matt Barrett, running a Liberator Assault group. This included a jump pack captain with speed of the Primarch, a a Death Company jump pack captain with Ragefield Warrior. The Death Company get built-in hit rerolls, so they don't need to be targeting their Oath of Moment target in order to try to fish for those extra sustains from Ragefield Warrior, which makes this kind of a match made in heaven. We also then have a combi weapon Lieutenant. Following that up is an Intercessor squad to hold the back objective. 3 units of 5 Assault Intercessor jump pack guys. That's pretty classic. We have a Death Company Marine squad to join with a Death Company captain. He gives the rest of the units sustained hits as well, so they're hit and rerolling sustained hits, and he can get enhanced sustained hits once per game. So as a little package, we see these pretty often. They're actually extremely effective, and they can basically trade for a lot of things in the game pretty reliably. We have a single Infiltrator squad, as well as a big unit of, as well as a bunch of Sanguinary Guard, 2 units of 3, and a unit of 6. Got to imagine that the jump pack captain jumps into the unit of 6. It's tough to shoot that unit down. You're talking about a unit with an invuln save, as well as 2+ armor that has access to Armor of Contempt, a free stratagem with Rites of War to try to keep them alive, which probably forces your opponent to shoot and then charge them. If they charge them, you use Speed of the Primarch and kill them first with fights first, and then continue on your merry way. So you do have a little bit of outs if your opponent doesn't have an insane volume of shooting that can actually clip this whole unit. Last and maybe least, we have 2 more jump pack Vanguard veteran squads. Interestingly, these guys are equipped with Inferno pistols, which I kind of like. You do have the option to advance and charge with Relentless Assault, so you can give them a little bit of threat range amp if you need it, or you're just using them to wander around the table and shoot at stuff that's engaged in melee, for example. A lot of times we see these guys essentially as a slightly lower damage output version of jump pack Assault Intercessors, but higher survivability thanks to the Storm Shields. But in this case, we're just using them for extra guns, which kind of equalizes the difference in damage output. And it gives you 2 more of these little 5-man units that are going to run around. So we have 3 units of 5 jump pack intercessors, 2 units of 5 Vanguard veterans, and 2 units of Sanguinary Guard. All are good into a variety of targets. You can kind of combine their attacks together to deal with bigger stuff, especially with Oaths of Moment, or you can use them to individually trade for enemies that are trying to pursue a more MSU style game plan. Either one of these is going to be very effective. So we love to see these like really, really wide rather than tall Blood Angels lists that make a great use of the Liberator Assault Group detachment ability, because each of those little individual units is going to hit well above their weight class. They can start to threaten like heavier vehicles and more tanky units just because of the massive improvements in damage output that the +1 attack and +2 strength that the detachment brings them. Now with that, we'll move on to another one of the larger events of the weekend, the Denver 40K Fight Club. This was pretty big and ran all 6 rounds, getting down to 1 single undefeated, which was Trey Burnett running Veterans of the Long War. As we just discussed, this event won the London Grand Tournament just last week, and Trey seems like was taking a little bit of a leaf out of Liam VSL's page over there, taking this detachment. Now, obviously, if you've watched that video, you know what this detachment does. It gives you a huge toolbox of stratagems, things like ignore cover, reactive moves, all really nice things to have, an Armor of Contempt effect, a fight first stratagem if you're targeting your quote-unquote Oath of Moment target. Trey has taken a little bit of a different look here, although much of the core of the list is the same as Liam VSL's. This includes Fabius Bile in a big unit of Chosen to give a long threat range advance and charge unit that's very difficult to kill, kind of engage your opponent aggressively on their side of the table, disrupt their scoring, and then try to toilet bowl the game in your favor. It does have Warp Talons, but it's only a unit of 5, as well as 2 units of Obliterators, 3 Predator Annihilators, a Chaos Biker unit for utility, 2 units of Legionaries, and a Cultist Mob, one of those units of Legionaries jumping a Chaos Lord in with no enhancements. We have Cypher to command point tax enemies, as well as a Lord Discordant on Hellstalker. The Lord Discordant has a little bit of command point economy with the Eye of Abaddon, which says that every time you kill your Oath of Moment target, your Focus of Hatred, as it's called in the detachment, you gain a CP on a 4+, which is very nice. He also gives you another nice long threat range unit. Interestingly, he can use Millennia of Experience to reactive move 6 inches, which makes him kind of hard to engage with, and he's a very aggressive character when he's pushing up towards the middle of the table, which gives you a good outlet for Endless Ire, which allows you to redeclare your Oath of Moment target when you originally destroy it, and again, potentially make that quote-unquote cheaper by generating command points when the initial Focus of Hatred target is destroyed. So this guy seems like a really nice piece of technology if you have good areas of the table where he can push up and get those lines of sight that he needs. So pretty cool evolution of the LGT winning list. Interesting to see the smaller unit of Warp Talons, but obviously those guys will still do great if you're shooting them into kind of lower value utility stuff. They're just going to be able to kill, 10 random infantry or maybe even 5 Space Marine equivalents if you have your Oath target locked in on them and you don't end up taking any damage from your Dark Pact check. That then lets them put up into reserve and then hop back down later. The hit rerolls from the Focus of Hatred ability is really powerful on this unit that is very high variance. If they do fail to kill with their charge, they charge on the, if they do fail to kill their target on the charge, it gets really bad for them. So ensuring that they can do that in any way is a huge deal. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the Santiago Open, where Jose Correa went undefeated with Aeldari, and not just any Aeldari, folks. This is an aspect host making use of every stratagem in the detachment because it's running an Avatar of Khaine. Absolutely insane. The cool thing here with the Avatar of Khaine is that you could use Doom Inescapable on it in order to buff its gunshot, basically maxing its damage and extending its range for a command point. Very rarely seen, one of the fewest used stratagems in the game, I would say. However, given the fact that the Avatar of Khaine also benefits from the detachment ability of rerolling hit rolls of 1 or wound rolls of 1, either way, this guy becomes significantly more reliable once he gets into melee. He's also just like kind of a flex pick in this case. While he used to be commonly seen in most Eldar lists when you could still use fate dice to affect him, now that he doesn't really have that many bonuses affecting him beyond just the passive benefits he gets from the Aspect Host detachment, he's not quite as exciting, but he is still a really cool piece to see. Otherwise, this list had Fuegan, Janezar, Lycus, and Malgan Ra. We had 2 units, of course, are Void Weavers for utility, a Wave Serpent to embark some of the Aspect Warriors. That likely includes the Fire Dragons, one of which is going to go with Fuegan and gives you a good outlet for Skyborn Sanctuary to jump back in the transport after they shoot. We do have a Dark Reaper squad for Malgan Ra to hop into, and a Falcon for them as well. The downside here is that we are playing Aspect Host, not War Host, so only one of these units is going to be able to move back into the transport at the end of the turn or after the attack. So you're going to have to throw one of them on the board and potentially throw one of them away in order to get value there. But the fact that we do have a Falcon means that oftentimes we can be repeating the rerolls from the Falcon if we do use Skyborn Sanctuary to hide a unit inside that every turn. And otherwise, we're just like going to push Fuegan and his Fire Dragons or the other units that are disembarking the Wave Serpent aggressively forward. We have a Ranger squad for utility, 2 units of Swooping Hawks, a single Warlock Skyrunner, which is one of the best utility units in the game. 45 points gives you a 14-inch move, single entity unit that is not a character, so it does not give up things like Assassination. A huge deal for that guy. We have 2 units of 5 Warp Spiders as well, and Howling Banshees for Janezar to hop into. Pretty standard stuff from an Aspect Host. It's interesting to see the double transport build in Aspect Host versus the War Host that we typically see, but absolute Chad move to include the Avatar of Khaine in this list. That's absolutely awesome. From there, we're going to move on to the Grand Tournament against Cancer, where Aaron Frick went undefeated with the brand new Leagues of Votann, going 5-0 and winning the event. This list was a Need Guard Oathband, the most popular detachment out of the faction, that gives you yield points when you destroy enemy units, and has a bunch of ways to let you spend those yield points, including Oathbound Speculator on a call to give your unit +1 to wound and reroll 1s to wound. Obviously, that +1 is if you burn yield points when you attack with them. That guy's going to be hopping into a big unit of 10 Einhir Hearthguard, and I actually have a video coming out later this week talking about this unit, which is a little serendipitous, so stay tuned for that one. The Einhir Hearthguard have one of the highest attack volumes because of their D3 shot grenade launcher that they're also including out of any of the possible attachments in the Votann faction, and so Oathbound Speculator to give them +1 to wound is huge on a wide variety of targets. So it lets them push the damage output of their plasma guns to the point where they can actually start threatening a lot of stuff, and then it also allows them to use their blast guns to kill even medium infantry a little bit more reliably, which is really nice. They also get the baked-in reroll 1s to hit effect, and then the Oathbound Speculator is going to give them reroll 1s to wound as well, which makes their high volume of attacks much more reliable. We have a Memnir Strategist then with Dead Reckoning in order to improve your yield point economy and give you more points as the game goes on. Uthar the Destined to give you some free stratagems, and then some standard inclusions. This includes 3 units of Brokir Thunderkin. Interestingly, these are all 3-mans. 2 of them are rocking Graviton Blast Cannons, and 1 of them is rocking SP Conversion Beamers, which is a good combo with Ancestral Sentence to give them sustained hits too. That's oftentimes going to be being put on the Einhir Hearthguard in this particular list, but the SP Conversion Beamers are a good place for it. A lot of times you see a unit of 6 in here in order to use that stratagem to its fullest effect, but in this case, I think we were just trying to kill a wider variety of targets rather than focusing on killing big heavy targets with single huge activations. We're taking a lot of sort of massed anti-infantry guns in this case. So 3 little units of 3 Brokier Thunderkin, 3 units of 3 Hecaton Land Fortress to carry that stuff around the table, 2 units of Hernkin Pioneers to flip objectives on enemies and to generate you yield points, a Hernkin Jaeger squad in order to combat squad inside the Capricus carrier, and then we have a unit of melee Ironkin Steeljacks. That's another unit that's really good with Ancestral that's another unit that's really good as kind of a late game piece once you started to get your yield point economy online. They can be delivered by the Hecaton Land Fortress, and while their threat range isn't great, if you're holding them to deliver them towards the end of the game, they're actually going to be a pretty scary unit. From there, we're going to move over to Adeptus Mechanicus at the Dumpster Fire GT Fall Edition, and this is when Daniel Garnaccia went undefeated with Halo Screed Battleclade. We've seen a lot of varieties of Halo Screed Battleclade over the last couple of months, especially since the Belisarius Call update in the last data slate update, and this one's like not really an exception. This includes a Sidonian Scatros, which is a nice little inclusion to take an objective and just hold down your backline or your expansion objective with a lone operative. We have Belisarius Call, the great man himself, granting some rerolls. 2 Tech Priests, 2 Tech Priest Manipuli. One of them has cognitive reinforcement for both varieties of your Doctrina Imperatives on his unit. That allows you to put him into a Cataphrone Breacher squad, get the benefits to their ranged attacks, and also retain the benefits to their melee attacks at the same time. So it gives them the opportunity to act in both a melee and ranged capacity simultaneously, which the unit really needs. We have another Manipulus with Sanctified Ordnance to go into a Cataphrone Destroyer team. These guys are an incredibly strong Overwatch threat, and with the extended range from Sanctified Ordnance, they can get some work done with their Flamers as well, on top of having that really strong Plasma Culverin shooting. We have a unit of Tyraxi Skystalkers, as well as an Infiltrator squad, 2 units of Sicarian Rust Stalkers to get advance and charge and benefit from their bonus to advance and charge rolls, and a bunch of Iron Strider Belisari, 2 units of 2 with las cannons to act as backline shooting. We also have some Scorpius Dune Riders to carry the Rangers around in the early game and then swap out for the Sicarian Rust Stalkers to improve their threat range up the table a little bit later. Very standard stuff from Halo Screed Battleclade. Definitely feels like that has been cemented as the best way to play Adeptus Mechanicus at this point, and it's very consistent. We've been seeing some pretty good results from them recently. Now with that, we're going to move over to the Sydney Supermajor, talk about this insane 8-0 Chaos Knights list. The event here was won by Nathan Princey, who was playing an Infernal Lance, and we have seen a lot of builds that are similar to this in the past. The exact loadout of War Dogs versus Demon allies that they take is oftentimes in flux, but the core of the list is very solid. Nathan was playing 3 Despoilers, equipped with the 36 shots, Strength 6, AP2, 2 damage, access to sustained hits from the Infernal Lance attachment ability, the Malefic Surges, as well as Ignore Cover. We have one of them with Bestial Aspect, which allows him to advance and fire his weapons, which is very good for improving his threat range. Don't forget the fact that these guys are towering, so they're going to be able to see around a lot of terrain, and they can, even if they forego or at least force themselves to use a stratagem to get a second Malefic Surge, if they choose to forego their output to improve their shooting with sustained hits, they can use their Malefic Surge for extra movement. So you can actually get weird angles from these guys that you wouldn't normally expect. They're being supported by 3 War Dog Carnivores for some high OC aggressive units, and a bunch of utility from Nurgle Demons. This includes 2 Nurglings to unlock the Demon slots because they're battle line keyworded, a Beast of Nurgle to score some secondaries on turn 1, and Rodigus, the big man himself. Rodigus is such a natural inclusion here with the Knight Despoilers. It's crazy. He slows down enemies that are trying to get to them. He reduces enemy OC on objectives, so he's able to just hold down on an objective and basically prevent a similar defensive profile to an entire knight before you're able to kill that. So if you want to take an objective from him, most of the time your utility units are not going to be able to contest him on the objective. You actually have to kill him to actually take the objective from him, unless you have very high OC characteristics yourself, and killing him just gives the Knight Despoilers another turn to shoot at you. Not to mention the fact that he's a pretty strong melee threat as well, so in addition to the War Dog Carnivores, the list actually slaps pretty hard too, even if the Knight Despoilers don't really do anything once you get them stuck in melee. Pretty classic list. It's pretty much the standard for Chaos Knights at this point, but it is a very cool one. Now with that, we're going to move over to Joseph Walsh at the Battle at the Guild, who won the event with Necrons. This was a Star Shatter arsenal, this time with no Silent King. Instead, the part of guys who sit in the middle of the table and are difficult to kill includes includes 20 Necron warriors. These guys have Orican the Diviner as well as a Royal Warden to join into them and some Crypto Thralls to expand the unit size. We've talked about this particular unit quite a bit in the context of Awakened Dynasty. It's interesting to see them in Starshatter Arsenal, but as I've talked about on the past in the channel, and even in my Getting Started on Necrons video, they are still pretty good in Starshatter Arsenal. You do get the ability to reanimate them at the end of the fight phase, which allows you to top off the unit if your opponent's not able to kill it, which is really cool. We have a Catacomb Command Barge with Dread Majesty, who's going to be able to improve their OC characteristic by 1, making those warriors even better at holding objectives. Plus, he can provide a Silent King style of aura, giving reroll 1s to hit and wound. We have a Hexmark Destroyer with Chrono Impedance Fields to give -1 damage to the vehicles in the army or mounted units. Illuminor Seraz to synergize with the warriors, giving them the +1 AP and Armor of Contempt. And Imhotep the Stormlord to power the army with command points. We have a Ghost Arc for a reactive reanimation on the Necron warriors. It's also important to note that the Catacomb Command Bars has a Resurrection Orb as well, so he's able to buff their reanimation. On top of that, a Reanimator to keep them top off, a Canoptic Spider to give a Feel No Pain to the vehicles, and he is kind of mirrored by a Convergence of Dominion. We've talked about this, I think, ages ago at this point, but this little guy gives you a Feel No Pain on your infantry units as well, which allows the Necron warriors to basically stack as many of their defensive benefits as they can together. Sometimes we see him alongside Lich Guard to try to make those guys as difficult as possible to kill in an Obeisance Phalanx, but in this case, we're doing it in Starshatter Arsenal, which is pretty cool. We have three Doomsday Arcs to shoot from the back line, a Flayed 1 unit for utility, and a Triarch Stalker to run up the middle of the table. I guess kind of interestingly as well, the Convergence of Dominion can also get the -1 damage bonus from the Hexmark Destroyer, so you can actually make it kind of difficult to kill, which is kind of cute if you have no other targets for it. But most of the time, he's going to start by targeting his Chrono Impedance Fields at the Triarch Stalker as it scouts and then moves up into the middle, completes some objectives, forces your opponent to kill it, and then opens up space for those warriors to really dominate the objectives in the center, forces your opponent to kind of come out in the open, and then they have to trade shots with Doomsday Arcs that have reactive moves and a bunch of other bonuses, rerolls from Dread Majesty, and things just go downhill from there. If you can't get through the warriors in the center, and to be fair, many armies can't get through that many warriors, especially if they are able to reanimate multiple times per turn, then you just won't get to the Doomsday Arcs, and you're just going to get blown out, both on scoring, because you have a bunch of OC3 Necron warriors sitting in your front line, but also just by being killed by the Doomsday Arcs themselves. And that moves us on, last but certainly not least, to the only 18-player Games Night 2 day. This was won by Brennan Abbott, running a Xenocreed Congregation. This detachment gives you rerolls on advance and charge rolls on your Acolytes and Neophytes while they're being led by a character. And it has a bunch of benefits if you end up losing your characters, such as Vengeance for the Martyr, which gives you reroll hits against enemies that kill your characters with full rerolls if they kill Primuses or Icon Wards. To that end, we are playing 2 Acolyte Icon Wards as well as a Primus. One of the Acolyte Icon Wards has Denunciator of Tyrants to give you +1 to hit and wound targeting character units for his entire unit. One of them has Deeds that Speak to the Masses, which allow you to regenerate an additional unit with 2 extra Resurgence points. And that Primus is taking Incendiary Inspiration, which gives you advance and charge. And don't forget that he's going to join a unit, then get rerolls to both advance and to charge. And not to mention the fact that he's going to improve the accuracy of the unit with his leadership ability. So oftentimes you'll see this guy push forward really aggressively into something really scary, force your opponent to counterattack it, lose the Primus, but then use Vengeance for the Martyr to buff your entire army against the thing that killed that Primus. We have 2 Biophagus as well as a Patriarch in the character selection and 2 Reductus Saboteurs for some infiltration. A ton of units of Acolyte Hybrids to house all these characters. That includes 2 units of 10, one of them with heavy mining tools. These guys are auto pistol guys, so they have the ability to farm command points off of objectives. We have 2 units of 5 Hand Flamer Acolytes as well as 3 units of Neophyte Hybrids, just 10 mans there in order to hold down objectives and obsec them. 2 Goliath Trucks to carry those guys to the battle, mostly carrying the Acolyte Hybrids around to deliver them to melee. Some additional AP granted by 2 Heavy Mortar equipped Achilles Ridge Runners. Those guys, one of them equipped with a spotter, one of them with a Survey Auger to strip cover from enemies. A hybrid, 2 hybrid Metamorph squads, which we often see joining with the Biophagus to fully amp up their damage output. And then 3 units of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers. One of them joins with the Patriarch, and that gives the army the ability to really clear out the midboard of the table. You're able to screen out enemy forward deployers by dropping the Reductus Saboteurs kind of aggressively. You don't really want to go near Reductus Saboteurs because they're going to inflict mortal wounds to you if they do so, and you can even still use Vengeance for the Martyr if your opponent comes in to try to kill them. It's not as big of an effect if it's not a Primus or an Icon recon ward, but it's still a way to use the stratagem. And then you can counterattack with all of the Pure-Strain Genestealers. They're very fast, and they're going to be able to clear your opponent's screening, which then allows you to deep strike things like the hybrid metamorphs up in the middle of the table, or push the Goliath trucks into an aggressive spot. Extremely cool detachment. It's very nice to see that Genestealer Cults post their nerfs are moving away from kind of the cookie cutter Ascension host lists that we saw them play in the past, and instead of running into these much more interesting varieties of detachments like Xenocreed Congregation, Outlander Claw, or even in some cases, Final Day or Biosanctic Brood Surge. It's all a very exciting time for these factions that are getting kind of reimagined post the data slate update. But with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I apologize that this one was delayed a little bit, but I hope you enjoyed my coverage of the Las Vegas Open winning list. And please come join me later on this afternoon after this video releases to discuss some of the other events that occurred this weekend, because it never stops coming. There were so many events this weekend and so many results to chew through. The metagame is absolutely vibrant right now, which is amazing. I should mention as well, I will also be streaming the Battle for Salvation 40k Major this coming weekend, so if you are watching that, so please come hang out with me and chat for that event. Should be a good time. It's 150 players, so it's going to be some tough competition. With that, I'll leave you to it. Thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.